The Galactic Council chamber shimmered with opulence, walls of tempered obsidian, light refracted through hovering crystals, and a view of the infinite stars that spun beyond the glass dome. It was here, seated in a crescent arc of high-backed thrones, that the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered, not to solve problems, but to wear authority like a crown. Chancellor Virel leaned back in his throne, fingers steepled, an expression of amused disdain painted across his lined face. "A child's ghost story," he muttered, his voice gravel-smooth, delivered by a scout who likely hallucinated from atmospheric interference. Representative Myla Wren didn't flinch. Young by council standards, her voice carried a measured defiance, soft yet unyielding. "The pilot died, Chancellor." His final logs described non-Newtonian gravitational shifts and autonomous structures emitting low-frequency pulses. He wasn't hallucinating. He was terrified. General Ilian Koskov beside her. Terror is an inefficient metric for truth. We've mapped the ridge perimeter for years. Cold rock and stellar debris. This drama over a static signal is. Static signals don't invert mass polarity, Myla snapped. Her eyes flicked to a floating display, where grainy footage from the scout's transmission flickered, a jagged silhouette standing atop an obsidian ridge, utterly motionless. Then static swallowed it whole. Silence crept into the chamber. The councillors looked to Rom, who exhaled through his nose, his voice carefully diplomatic. "We'll send a verification fleet. A standard reconnaissance sweep. No further speculation until then." The gavel came down with a faint chime, and the session dissolved into murmurs. Myla remained seated, watching them leave, robes sweeping, egos brimming. She stared once more at the figure in the feed. There had been something deliberate in its posture, not a creature, a witness, or worse, a warning. The fleet deployed within 72 hours, 12 cruisers, 3 carriers, and a command vessel outfitted with graviton scramblers and deep space sensors. Captain Darren Solers, commanding the lead ship Ascendancy, stood with his officers on the observation deck as a ridge came into view, an endless arc of black spires and planetary carcasses. Sensors screamed with interference the moment they crossed the threshold. "EM scatters off the charts," said Lieutenant Arrows, adjusting his neural HUD. "Getting refracted returns from objects that don't exist on the star map." Solers narrowed his eyes. Tactical posture. Minimal engagement. Record everything. He didn't mention the unease clawing at his chest. He'd been through solar wars and mutiny uprisings. This felt wrong. Back on Varelian Prime, Myla walked alone through the Hall of Echoes, a corridor reserved for diplomatic reflection. Her footsteps echoed under curved ceilings, beside murals depicting past victories, council dominance across time. She stopped before one, the subjugation of the ethery species, their crystalline cities reduced to rubble beneath council dreadnoughts. She had been raised to believe the council brought peace. Lately, she only saw fear disguised as order. Her wristcom buzzed. She tapped it, an encrypted signal. The fleet had arrived. Their scans were active. Solarzy's voice filtered through. "We're observing anomalies consistent with the scout's data. Ambient gravitic flux. Visual contact established with unknown structure." She leaned in. "Repeat that." "There's a formation, possibly artificial. Black obelisks. Symmetry that defies natural formation. Then there's..." He hesitated. "A figure. It's standing on a ridge, staring at us." The message cut. No static. No signal loss. Just silence. On the Ascendancy, lights flickered as if the ship itself were exhaling. Captain Solers clenched the railing. On screen, the figure remained. Humanoid shape. Featureless. Not approaching. Not threatening. Just watching. Ship-wide diagnostic. He ordered, "Power down non-essentials. We're not triggering anything by accident." A new sound vibrated through the hull, a subharmonic pulse, almost musical, almost familiar. One of the crew began muttering. His voice fragmented. Solers turned. "Medical, get him to..." The crewman's visor cracked with a sound like brittle ice. He collapsed. His helmet shattered, scattering like glass. Gasps filled the bridge. Panic rippled. Alarms triggered. Weapons systems initiated without command. The Ascendancy began to turn. Then the stars bent. The space beyond the ridge curved inward, not like a black hole, but as if reality itself were responding to a gaze. Solar's ordered a retreat. Only Static answered. On Varelian Prime, the Council had reconvened. This time, the murmurs were louder. Solar's last partial transmission was on full display. Pause at the moment the crewman's visor shattered. Containment breach. Rum offered weakly. No breach, said Myla, her voice like flint. Not unless containment now includes physics collapsing under observation. Custard, I'm initiating a mobilization order. We'll send in dreadnoughts with quantum warheads. You'll start a war with something that hasn't declared one, Myla countered. Something we don't even understand. Rum looked between them. We will not be marked by shadows on a ridge. If they want to be noticed, we'll show them who watches whom. Myla stayed at the frozen image. The figure still hadn't moved, yet its presence dominated the screen. Something ancient had seen them, and it had smiled. The council chamber had never been so quiet. Screens flickered with fragments from the Ascendancy, garbled visuals, scrambled data, and the chilling final frame. A crewman's shattered visor, blood suspended like rubies in zero gravity. No one spoke until Rumvirel broke the silence, his voice cold and deliberate. We have lost contact with the entire fleet. General Cost didn't blink. Then we send another. Full military protocol. No surveys. No restraint. Representative Myla Wren leaned forward, tension tightening her shoulders. That wasn't an attack. That was a message. They were being watched, and when they laughed, they were erased. Speculation, Rum said, dismissing her with a flick of his fingers. If you want to believe in spirits from the void, write poetry. This isn't belief, she said. It's pattern recognition. A low chime interrupted them. Priority alert from the edge sectors. Myla accessed a report on her wristcom, eyes scanning rapidly. One of the scout ships, it just reappeared. Impossible, Cos muttered. We recovered no pods. Myla stood, heart racing. Then this isn't a pod. It's a ship. Intact. The council scrambled to the command center, where security officers stood frozen before the main display. The vessel, VSR-93, Whisperlight, had returned from the ridge, drifting into an automated orbital dock without responding to any hails. Its hull bore no damage, but its lights were dark. No power signatures. Just silence. A recovery team was dispatched, broadcasting live to council members. Myla watched closely as suited figures moved through the ghost ship's interior. The walls were scrawled with symbols, etched, not burned, carved from within. We're not alone, one of the operatives whispered over comms. These weren't here when we launched. Then they found the pilot. He was strapped to his chair, pale and unblinking, alive but unmoving. His mouth hung open, eyes wide, pupils entirely white. Get him to med bay, Myla ordered through the channel. Later, in the med hall beneath the council tower, she stood behind a polarized glass wall, watching the pilot under sedation. Monitors flickered above his bed. His lips twitched, murmuring syllables a linguist couldn't place, like echoes of a dead tongue. Then his voice rose, clear, deliberate. They stood before stars were born. They are not gods. They are reminders. The lights above him blinked twice and held steady. Myla stepped back, pulse hammering. The pilot turned his head toward the glass, as if he sensed her. They said we were arrogant, he whispered. They showed me what comes next. Myla didn't wait for permission. She took a transcript of the murmurs and sprinted to the council archives, bypassing security with a clearance. Inside, she searched old xenolinguistic records, comparing the pilot speech to dead dialects catalogued centuries ago. A match appeared, not perfect, but close. A civilization that predated council formation, lost in a gravitational implosion. Their final records warned of an unseen force that punished technological overreach, described only as a ridge that watches. She barely noticed Cos entering behind her. You're chasing ghosts in data, he said flatly. They are not ghosts, she replied. They are judges. Cos crossed his arms. Then it's even more reason to strike first. You're going to provoke a force that shattered our fleet without lifting a weapon. His eyes burned with fury. We're the Galactic Council. We do not kneel. Myla stared at him. Then we'll fall. Elsewhere, in the mid-sector colonies, unrest had begun to churn. News of the fleet's disappearance spread despite suppression protocols. Conspiracy forums lit up, street gatherings turned to protests. People whispered of the ridge, calling it retribution, prophecy, or even salvation. In New Atheron, a crowd gathered at the base of a hollowed Sitter statue, chanting for council resignation. Their leader, a once obscure scientist named Kalinvor, held a crude model of the ridge high above his head. They laughed at it. He shouted. Now they bleed silence. Council enforcement units arrived, dispersing the crowd, but the footage spread anyway. Myla saw it while waiting outside the pilot's room, tension dragging at her spine. Rum appeared beside her, calm as ever, sipping citrus extract from a crystal vial. They always stir when they smell weakness. They are not wrong to stir, she said. He raised a brow. You're aligning with traitors now. I'm aligning with survival. He studied her for a long moment. There are whispers, Ren, that you're contacting rebel elements. She met his gaze without flinching. They're not rebels. They're realists. Something out there just cracked our fleet open like glass, and you're worried about optics. Rom's smile was slow. Then let's improve our optics. He turned to Kos, who had just entered. Full-scale mobilization. We go back to the ridge, with everything. Kos nodded once. No more scouts. No more doubt. Myla watched them, her stomach heavy with dread. She knew what was coming. The council had been mocked, and now they would answer, not with curiosity, but with war. She returned once more to the pilot. His eyes opened as if waiting for her. They always strike twice, he whispered. The second blow is not to kill. It's to remind you that you were warned. His pupils shifted, not dilating, but spiraling outward like vortices of space. Myla stepped back. For the first time in her career, she wished she could forget everything she'd ever learned. The Citalites of Aurelian Prime dimmed one by one as the broadcast began. An emergency address from Chancellor Virel, projected to every sector still tethered to the Council. His image filled the sky above plazas and Capitol towers, voice deliberate, rehearsed. Our enemies believe our silence is surrender, he declared. We will show them that silence is simply the breath before the storm. Within the Council's war chamber, General Kos stood over a digital map riddled with red sigils. Behind him, the fleet loomed, recommissioned dreadnoughts, quantum missile arrays, orbital harness ships. This was no expedition. It was a declaration. Myla Ren watched it unfold from the perimeter, eyes burning with helplessness. She had tried once more to speak, tried to beg them to wait, to investigate, to understand, but Rum had silenced her with a quiet command. You're either with the Council or beneath it. That night, Rum was dead. The broadcast never concluded. A sharp pulse cut through every device, screens flickering before fading to black. Emergency lights triggered across the tower, and security forces stormed the Chancellor's chambers only to find his body slumped in his chair, face intact, but the front of his skull fractured inward, clean, bloodless, as though shattered glass had folded inward instead of bursting out. There were no signs of entry, no suspects, no alarms triggered. Only a phrase burned into the floor beneath his chair. The second blow remembers. Kos took command before dawn. The Council was reduced to emergency status. Entire wings of the tower were sealed, and evacuation protocols quietly initiated for the planet's elite. To the rest of the galaxy, the Council projected strength. But inside, they were unraveling. Myla vanished. She was already aboard Vengeance Spark, the dreadnought leading the retaliatory fleet toward the ridge. She wore a plain officer's uniform, hidden among the thousands preparing for war. Her plan was simple. Reach the ridge, broadcast one final warning, and if no one listened, bear witness. The fleet entered the perimeter of the ridge like intruders into a cathedral. Space bent slowly, not violently. Lights dimmed without failing. Time felt viscous. The obelisks had moved. Where once they floated at the boundary, now they had formed a corridor. Perfect symmetry, a passageway not carved, but willed into being. Kos stood on the bridge, flanked by his command, voice steady. Lock targeting systems. Prepare quantum warheads for synchronized discharge. Weapons primed, aimed directly into the corridor. Then the ridge responded. One by one, lights across the dreadnought dimmed, not just flickering, but fading into absolute darkness. Console lights died. Emergency power failed. Even the artificial gravity began to stutter. Cos barked orders, his voice strangled beneath the mounting silence. A figure appeared outside the main viewport, impossibly tall, cloaked in void. It didn't approach. It didn't move. It simply was, framed by the twin obelisks like a sentinel watching a mistake unfold. A whisper echoed across every intercom, every neural implant, every heart. Mockery is not defiance. It is an invitation. Cos snarled, activated the manual override, and launched the first missile. It never left the ship. Instead, the missile folded in on itself mid-launch, collapsing into a pinprick of blue light and vanishing. Then the vengeance spark began to fracture, not from impact, not from fire, but from silence. Helmets cracked, not exploded, not breached, cracked, like porcelain under a tuning fork. Officers clutched their heads as glass-like fractures webbed across their visors. On a lower deck, Myla huddled near comm relay, her voice barely rising above a whisper as she transmitted. "This is Representative Wren. We are not under attack. We are under judgment. If you hear this, do not follow. Do not mock. Listen. Watch. Remember." Above her, the bridge collapsed inward, not in fire, but in a fold, like a memory closing itself. Myla escaped in a maintenance pod, ejected into the silence beyond the wreckage. Through the narrow viewport, she watched the ridge shift again, its corridor closing. Then came the light. Not bright, not violent, just present. It surrounded the obelisks, the debris, the echoes of power now rendered meaningless. A final image lingered on her neural HUD, lines of language etched in impossible angles, slowly translating. This is the last breath before understanding. Her pod drifted. Back in the central sectors, chaos bloomed. Council command structures crumbled. Sectors declared independence. Riots ignited in cities that once chanted unity. And then, without warning, every remaining beacon from the ridge shut down. No more signals. No more ships. No more answers. Only silence. Myla, adrift in her pod, activated the final beacon and recorded a transmission. She looked tired. Not broken. Changed. They stood on a ridge and watched us mock them. Then they shattered us, not out of vengeance, but memory. We were not the first to forget humility. We won't be the last. But maybe someone will remember this. She ended the message. A red light blinked. The beacon pulsed once, then launched itself toward Allied space, carrying a warning like a spark in the void. Behind her, the ridge pulsed once more. Watching. The beacon reached the outskirts of the Cygna Accord weeks after launch, its signal a whisper carried across the void. It was picked up by a forgotten relay station in the mining belt of Theta-V technician Ile Mig, was the first to decode it, a simple transmission, low bandwidth, nothing flashy. But the voice on the other end turned her blood to ice. "This is Representative Myla Wren. The Council has fallen. The ridge remains. We mocked what we did not understand, and we were shattered." She played it again. And again. Each time, the gravity of the message deepened. The words weren't just a report. They were a eulogy. ILA forwarded the data to the Accord's assembly, but by then, dozens of other transmissions began to echo the same story. Scattered voices. Fractured logs. A warning that grew louder not by volume, but by repetition. Every time, the phrase repeated, they stood before stars were born. It didn't take long for the Accord to convene. Their capital was modest compared to Varelian Prime. No glass domes, no obsidian spires, just steel and circuitry, a civilization built for endurance, not elegance. The assembly's lead, Marshal Hadron Sol, listened to the beacon with unblinking focus. "I believe her," he said simply. Others scoffed. The Council's collapse is an opportunity, not a curse. If they were destroyed, it's their own arrogance that did it. "Arrogance is precisely what killed them," Hadron replied. "We either learn or we repeat." They voted, not on war, not on retreat, but on silence. The Accord issued a galaxy-wide hold order. No vessels to approach the ridge, no probes, no scans. No curiosity. They chose to remember. Yet even that wasn't enough. Months passed. The galaxy reshaped itself. Territories once loyal to the Council fractured into enclaves, each declaring their own truths. Some worshipped the ridge as divine judgment. Others denied it altogether. Myla's message was called prophecy, her survival a symbol. But few asked the question that mattered most. Why was she spared? Myla herself didn't know. Her pod had been recovered by the Accord and hidden in a secure orbital station far from public view. She spent her days under observation, physically fine, mentally steady, but always watching the stars. A scientist named Drell Savin was assigned to her, not a god, a scholar, curious without being blind. "Do you think it's alive?" he asked one evening, as they observed the ridge's last known coordinates on a starfield simulation. "No," she said. "Alive implies it began, that it can end. This watches because it remembers. That's all it does, but that's enough." He paused, studying her. "Then why show mercy?" She considered that carefully. "Because I listened." The word sat between them like a third presence. Elsewhere, the old Council war machines, dreadnoughts, orbitals, automatons, now rusted in forgotten orbits, drifting without command. The galaxy felt quieter. Not peaceful, but hushed, like a room waiting to see if the door would open again. Then, one morning, all across the network systems of the Accord, a single phrase appeared. No source traceable, no signal pathway identifiable. It bloomed on screens, in implants, even across the hulls of ships. The third blow is never sent. It is chosen. Panic rippled through some colonies. Others interpreted it as absolution. Still others began pilgrimages to the coordinates where the ridge once hovered, hoping to find wisdom or forgiveness. The Accord debated. Do they intervene? Do they let belief swell into something dangerous? Marshal Hadron turned to Myla. "What do we do with a galaxy full of people who are certain they've been spared for a reason?" She looked tired. Remind them that being spared isn't the same as being trusted. Later that week, she asked to return to the ridge. Hadron denied the request. She didn't argue. Instead, she gave him a handwritten note, archaic in form, intentional in delivery. If the third blow is chosen, the note read, then someone must stand to refuse it. In secret, she left. Her ship was unarmed, small, fast. She used an old diplomatic clearance that had somehow survived the purge of Council systems. No one stopped her. No one saw her go. She reached the perimeter in silence. The ridge was gone. But something else had replaced it. A vast lattice of floating structures, as if the obelisks had grown roots across the stars. They didn't glow. They didn't pulse. They simply waited. She opened the channel, her voice calm. "Sensei, I came back, not to apologize, not to demand, just to listen again." There was no reply, not immediately, but slowly lights flickered across the lattice, not as commands, but as language, shapes, memory. The stars themselves seemed to tilt, aligning around the message. She smiled softly, then turned off her ship's engines. She drifted forward into the silence, into the memory, and behind her the galaxy kept turning, watched now not by rulers, but by echoes, by those who remembered what came before, and those who dared to believe that watching could be wiser than striking.